out of place. Artifacts are objects whose existence cannot be explained from the point of view of the accepted chronology of civilization development, human evolution, or technological progress. Most often they are objects whose purpose is unknown, but which have obvious historical, archaeological, or even paleontological interest. And in 1991, one of the most mysterious such discoveries took place in the subpolar Ural. A large geological exploration expedition, which arrived in this harsh region with a completely pragmatic goal to look for gold in riverbeds and sand deposits, unexpectedly stumbled upon something completely beyond the scope of ordinary finds. Instead of precious metal, the researchers found tiny tungsten springs with molybdenum cores, as well as other miniature parts resembling elements of complex mechanisms. Analysis and subsequent studies showed that the age of these artifacts can reach at least 100,000 years, a figure that completely contradicts the official history of technology and metallurgy. The discovery was recalled by mineralogist engineer Regina Akimova, a participant in that expedition. In 1991, I was working with a microscope in our field laboratory, which was set up right in the mountains. We were examining sand and gravel that came from prospectors. And then one day they brought me a batch of samples, in which I suddenly discovered many strange, tiny springs. What kind of springs were these, and where did they come from? It was absolutely incomprehensible. I have been working in gold prospecting since 1962. I have seen a variety of inclusions and minerals, but I have never encountered anything like this. The largest of these mysterious objects reached 2 to 3 millimeters in length and were visible to the naked eye. But the bulk of the finds were so small that they could only be seen under a powerful microscope. The springs had an ideal shape, the same pitch of the turns, and some clearly had a core made of a different metal. It seemed that they were made on modern, high-tech equipment, but this was simply impossible, given the supposed age of the finds. In 1992, having learned about the discovery and the prospectors' certificates, a group of specialists from the Urals branch of the Academy of Sciences left. They arrived at the expedition camp, examined the find site, and received samples of the springs from Regina Sergeevna for further study. Already in laboratory conditions, spectral analysis and microscopic studies were carried out, and the chemical composition of these mysterious objects was determined. The surprise of the scientists who saw these strange objects for the first time was literally immeasurable. In official reports, they were cautiously called natural formations, in quotation marks, as if the authors themselves doubted their own words. But in fact, these were not stones or crystals at all, but tiny, skillfully made parts. Analysis showed that the springs consisted almost entirely of tungsten, one of the rarest and most refractory metals on Earth. In nature, tungsten is found exclusively in the form of compounds, not in pure form, and certainly not in the form of ready-made elastic parts. The shape of the springs was striking in its precision, ideal uniformity of turns, identical pitch of the spiral, clearly defined edges. Some specimens were equipped with molybdenum cores, a combination used today in precision engineering to increase strength and wear resistance. Others ended with a tiny tungsten droplet, as if melted at an ultra-high temperature. But the melting point of tungsten is over 3,000 degrees Celsius, and it is the most refractory metal known to mankind. Geologists, puzzled by this find, decided to seek advice from military specialists, defense industry workers, hoping that perhaps these were parts of secret equipment that fell into the ground during testing. The springs were placed in a small plastic container and sent for examination. The military, having turned them over in their hands and examined them under magnification, only shrugged their shoulders. Not ours. We have not yet reached such nanotechnology. Several years later, in 1994, Elena Matvieva, a candidate of geology and mineralogy, head of the Department of the Central Base and Non-Ferrous Metals, told about similar springs. She personally encountered mysterious objects in the area of the Naruto River. According to her, there was no doubt that these could be parts of bulldozers, motors, or spirals from broken light bulbs. The finds were clearly of a completely different nature. We were exploring gold placers, she recalled. And we worked in the old proven way. We dug pits with shovels and a pick, carried out a face, and then pulled buckets of sand up on a rope. And in these samples, among quartz grains and small rock fragments, we began to find tiny tungsten springs. What was especially striking was that they were found in the depths of untouched civilizations and taiga regions at a depth of 6 to 12 meters, where neither technology nor people had penetrated. And this, Elena Veniaminova explained, corresponds to the Upper Paleolithic, that is tens of thousands of years BC. We studied these springs in as much detail as possible, including an electron microscope study. Under magnification they looked amazing. Clear even turns the same spiral pitch. Metallic luster. In shape they really resembled modern, incandescent spirals used in electric lamps, but in a number of technical parameters. Wire thickness, winding density, metal structure, they clearly differed from them. And most importantly, the age of the find categorically did not allow it to be classified as a product of modern industry. Of course, she said, this is not a natural formation. Tungsten in this form does not form by itself. This is skillful work and the work of someone who perfectly understood the properties of metals and the technology of their processing. But who could have created this hundreds of thousands of years ago, and using what technologies? That is the question that no one wants to answer. Elena Veniaminova, a specialist with 40 years of experience in geological exploration and mineralogy, knew that further study of such finds would inevitably lead to conclusions that are inconvenient for academic science, and therefore, no one was in a hurry to continue the research. After all, if their artificial origin is confirmed, it will be necessary to explain who exactly was capable of such technologies in the era when, according to official history, man had just emerged from the Stone Age. As a result, in the official reports and reports of the Academy of Sciences on the finds of springs, only a terse, dry note appeared ending with the phrase, "The genesis is unclear." This was the only official formulation, hiding a lot of questions behind it. It is curious that similar artifacts were found long before the Ural expeditions. Thus, on June 22, 1844, a note appeared in the British newspaper The Times, under the headline "An Extraordinary Incident." It said that a few days earlier in a Scottish quarry, workers had found a strange object in a piece of solid rock, a gold thread. The find amazed everyone because the thread was deep in the thickness of the stone, the age of which was estimated at millions of years. Part of this gold thread was carefully extracted and brought to the editorial office of the local newspaper in the town of Kelsa, where it was put on public display. The author of that old article in the Times wrote, with slight mockery, noting how long this monument of bygone eras could have lain in the bowels of the earth before the workers extracted it from the thickness of the stone, baffling any respectable archaeologist or geologist. And indeed, the find seems so incredible that it destroyed the usual ideas about the past. Although it is no longer possible to pinpoint the exact location from which the gold thread stone was extracted, it is known that the sandstone in the Rutherford area, where it probably came from, dates back to about 360 million years. But this was far from the only case in which nature or someone else left strange objects in ancient rocks. An equally mysterious report was presented at the time to the British Association for the Advancement of Science by Sir David Brewster. He claimed that quarry workers at Shetty near Dundee, while quarrying sandstone, discovered an iron nail embedded in a solid block of stone. When the rock was split, it turned out that the head of the nail went almost an inch into the monolith, and the shaft remained tightly clamped in it. Geological examination showed that the sandstone in this area belongs to the early Devonian period. That is, its age is at least 380 million years. Here orthodox science was, again, faced with an awkward question. Who could have forged an iron nail long before the advent of man, let alone metallurgy? Another puzzle came from Austria in 1885, in a foundry in the small town of Vaclabrück. located approximately halfway between Salzburg and Linz. A strange metal object fell out of a piece of coal when it was being split into pieces. It was an almost perfect cube, measuring 2.6 times 2.6 times 1.8 inches with a neat, deep groove along its perimeter. And two opposite sides were noticeably rounded, as if someone had specially processed it. The son of the foundry owner, impressed by the unusual find, handed the cube over to the Linz Museum, where it was carefully examined. Analysis showed that the object was comparable in hardness to steel and consisted of an alloy with a high content of carbon and nickel. It is surprising that a piece of coal, formed millions of years ago, could contain a product that requires advanced metallurgy. Fortunately, they managed to take a plaster cast of it, because the original itself, unfortunately, was lost over time under unclear circumstances. Perhaps the original of the mysterious Austrian cube was lost in the post-war chaos and confusion of the war years, but fortunately its plaster cast has been preserved. But this is far from the only find that calls into question the usual picture of history. In 1952, another amazing case occurred in California. A specialist in drilling artesian wells, working at a depth of 37 feet, stumbled upon something completely unusual. Right in the thickness of solid, multi-million-year-old sandstone, he saw the obvious remains of an iron chain. The links were firmly embedded in the stone, as if they had been there since its formation. Unfortunately, as is often the case with such discoveries, the exact location of that borehole is now unknown. Over time, everything was overgrown. The documents were lost and the evidence remained only in the form of newspaper articles and oral stories of eyewitnesses. But if ancient layers contain items that are obviously the product of human hands, then it is logical to assume that, somewhere in the distant past, about which we know nothing, their creators existed. Similar stories pop up here and there. Thus, in 1862 in Macoupin County, Illinois, miners, digging coal at a depth of about 90 feet underground, came across an even stranger find: bones that were recognized as human. At first they were covered with a hard, shiny coating of a dark color, almost black, exactly the same as the coal itself, in which they rested. When the workers carefully scraped away the film, they found white, well-preserved bones that were indistinguishable in shape from those of modern humans. But the dating of the coal in the area was shocking. According to modern estimates, it is at least 286 million years old. It turned out that human remains were trapped in the depths of a rock that had formed long before official science even allowed for the existence of humans.